Here is something nobody tells you about the ship carrying your television, your running shoes, and half the contents of your kitchen. It has no brakes. Not weak brakes, not slow brakes, no brakes. Right now, at this exact moment, vessels the length of 4 football fields are approaching the coastlines of Los Angeles, Rotterdam, and Singapore, carrying 200,000 tons of cargo, and the only thing standing between them and the dock is a system so fragile, so ancient, and so quietly privatized that most governments don't fully understand what they've handed over. To understand why stopping a ship is different from stopping anything else humans have ever built, you first have to understand what these things actually are. The largest container ships in the world today, vessels like the Ever Ace or the ships operated by MSC, are called ultra-large container vessels. They are roughly 400 meters long. That is taller than the Empire State Building laid on its side. They carry over 20,000 shipping containers stacked 9 stories above the waterline. When fully loaded, a single ship can weigh in excess of 200,000 metric tons. For context, a fully loaded Boeing 747 weighs about 412 tons at takeoff. These ships weigh roughly 500 times that. And unlike a plane which moves through air, a ship moves through water, a medium that is 800 times denser. Every action has consequences measured not in seconds, but in kilometers. This is where the numbers stop making intuitive sense. When a fully loaded, ultra-large container vessel is cruising at its standard operating speed of around 22 knots, roughly 25 miles per hour, it carries a kinetic energy equivalent to several nuclear submarines moving at full speed. The momentum locked inside that floating steel city is almost incomprehensible. So what happens when the captain cuts the engine? Nothing. Not immediately. The ship keeps moving. It will continue moving for miles. In fact, the standard stopping distance for a large container vessel traveling at full speed with engines put into full reverse is somewhere between 3 and 10 kilometers. That process takes between 15 and 30 minutes depending on the vessel's size, its load, and the sea conditions. And here is the critical detail. Reversing the engine is not a brake. It is a suggestion. The propeller spinning backward generates thrust in the opposite direction, but it is fighting against the inertia of an object that weighs more than most small towns. The engine can only do so much. You are not stopping the ship, you are negotiating with physics, and physics is not in a hurry. This is precisely why the concept of traditional braking is meaningless at this scale. You cannot bolt a caliper onto the hull of a 200,000-ton vessel and squeeze. There is no surface to grip. There is no mechanism that could absorb that energy without disintegrating. The ship does not stop, it is slowed. And the distinction between those two things is what the entire port industry is built around. So if the engine is just a suggestion, what actually does the work? The answer is a combination of 3 things, and none of them are particularly high-tech. The first is sea room. Ships begin their deceleration extraordinarily early, sometimes 20 to 30 miles out from port. Speed is reduced in stages over hours. By the time a vessel enters the approach channel, it is already moving at a crawl compared to its open ocean speed. The second is the anchor. In an emergency, a dropped anchor is not a parking mechanism, it is a drag device. It creates friction against the seabed and forces the bow to swing, bleeding off directional momentum. Sailors have been doing this since before recorded history. The largest ships in the world still rely on the same basic principle. The third, and most critical, is the tugboat. Small, absurdly powerful vessels that attach to the hull of an incoming ship and physically push or pull it into position. A single modern escort tug generates somewhere between 60 and 100 tons of bollard pull, meaning raw traction force. One ship might require 6 or 8 of them, working in coordinated sequence to bring it safely to the berth. Without tugs, modern container ports simply do not function. And here is where the story gets interesting. Because tugboats are not glamorous, most people have never thought about who owns them or who controls the right to operate them inside a port. The answer should by now feel familiar. It is a private oligopoly operating under authority delegated by the government with almost no public oversight. In most of the world's major ports, tugboat services are granted through exclusive concession agreements. the same mechanism DP World uses to control terminal operations. One company or a small consortium wins the right to provide tug services inside a given port. Once they have that contract, every ship that enters has no choice but to use them. The global market is dominated by a handful of players. Major players include Svitzer, a subsidiary of Maersk, Kotug Smit, and Beluda Towage. These companies collectively handle tug operations across hundreds of ports worldwide. They set the rates, they control the timing, and because no port authority can allow a 200,000-ton vessel to approach a berth without escort, these companies hold a leverage position that is almost impossible to overstate. The captain of that ship, technically sovereign on their own vessel, must surrender operational control the moment the harbor pilot boards and the tugs attach their lines. The harbor pilot is another layer of this system. In most jurisdictions, a ship entering port must accept a local harbor pilot, an independent specialist who takes the helm for the final approach. These pilots are not employees of the shipping line. They are not government workers. They are typically members of a private guild, a self-regulating professional monopoly that has existed in various forms since the 1800s. The margin for error in all of this is razor thin, and occasionally it disappears entirely. In March 2021, the Ever Given, a 400-meter-long container ship, ran aground in the Suez Canal and blocked global trade for 6 days, costing the world economy an estimated $10 billion per day. The ship did not suffer a mechanical failure. It encountered a sandstorm that reduced visibility and increased wind pressure on its hull. The tugs could not hold it. Physics 1. In 2019, a container ship in Hamburg drifted into a dock and caused millions in structural damage. In 1978, the Amico Cadiz supertanker lost steering off the coast of France after a tug cable snapped during an emergency tow. It ran aground and released 220,000 tons of crude oil into the English Channel. Every one of these incidents traces back to the same root cause. The system for stopping these vessels has not fundamentally changed in a century. The ships, however, have gotten dramatically larger. And they are still getting bigger. The next generation of container vessels currently being ordered will exceed 450 meters in length and carry over 24,000 containers. The ports receiving them were largely designed in the 1980s and the 1990s. The tug fleets servicing them have not scaled proportionally. And the concession agreements governing those tug fleets give private operators very little incentive to invest in larger, more powerful vessels unless a government forces the issue. Nobody wants to pay for the solution to a problem that has not yet become a catastrophe. So the next time you see a massive container ship gliding silently into port, understand what you are actually watching. You are watching the successful conclusion of a 30-minute negotiation with the laws of physics managed by a private pilot guild and executed by a tugboat oligopoly operating under a concession agreement signed by a port authority that may not fully grasp what it gave away. The ship has no brakes. It never did. What it has is a system of carefully arranged private interests that have made it their business to make the impossible look routine. And like every other hidden infrastructure holding the modern world together, it works perfectly, right up until the moment it does not.